Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends. I wanted to do a mini-series talking about each of the current raid meta teams and how to get the most out of them. Each video will start with the basics and progress to more advanced concepts in a manner that provides value for all flavors of viewer. Today, we'll start with a mech team. The ad mech team revolves around one character, Exeter Row. The Sicarian Rustwalker has abilities that do out-of-turn damage every time a mechanical unit attacks an enemy that he is adjacent to. Things get out of hand pretty quickly, especially if you can flood the board with mechanical summons. That brings us on to his friends, Tangita and Actus, the rest of the core trio for this team. Actus basically triggers an attack from any unit he repairs. Tangita has two modes. One summons and the other makes adjacent summons attack the same target if they can. The idea is simple. You use Actus to repair Tangita, which causes it to attack, get a critical mass of summons, and then change stance for Tangita. This then causes each adjacent mechanical summon to attack the same target, allowing multiple further triggers with Exeter Row. The remaining slots for the 5-man team are flexible depending on each boss, and I'll go into more specifics for each boss later. Additional characters should do one of a few things: add hits or damage to Exeter Row's triggers, add more mechanical summons or hits to trigger Exeter Row more often, or add something unique, like in the case of Aleph Null, creating difficult to kill summons that are especially useful against Mortarion. Before I dive into boss-specific interactions and strategy, we should discuss a few important concepts when it comes to the team. The first idea that people need to understand is how the summons from Tangita are created. The rules are fairly simple. If all of the hexes around Tangita are equal, then the Skitarii spawn at the 12 o'clock position and then continue to be created in a clockwise order. If there is an advantageous hex, say it is a high ground or healing hex, then the Tangita summons will try and spawn in those hexes instead. Similarly, if there is a negative hex effect, for example the fire hex effect, then the Skitarii will not summon on that hex unless it is the last one available. A small detail: the contamination hex effect, while negative for other units, is not considered a bad one for the Skitarii, who are unaffected by it. After summoning, a similar set of rules applies. Essentially, the AI will always try and do the most damage possible. Given that the Skitarii summons have a one-hit melee physical attack, they will generally try and move out of melee and attack at range with their 3 toxic hits, so that they can deal as much damage as possible. After looking at positive and negative hex effects, the summons will try and stand next to Tangita as their next priority. That is to say, if the summons can, they will form a sort of diamond shape and surround or flank Tangita. When in this position, each of Tangita's attacks will trigger all 3 of the adjacent Skitarii. That is why you want to try and position Actus adjacent to both Tangita and the boss, so that he doesn't end up blocking one of the 3 ranged spots. Galatian, the Dreadnought Machine of War, is also a summon and works well with Tangita, as we'll show later on. Speaking of show, the sniper drones summoned by Shozil follow a similar logic, but it's slightly harder to pin down. These drones try and spawn next to show and remain next to the Tau character, generally speaking. The logic here isn't as clear-cut for the drones. Sometimes they go for the high ground hexes, and sometimes they remain adjacent to show. Truth be told, I've seen these drones spawn on occasion 4 or 5 hexes away, or appear in melee when there are free hexes at range, and I think that there are fringe cases that I still can't fully explain. The fact that the drones try and move next to or follow show means that show can often combine well with the mech team, or potentially allow Tangita to trigger more than 3 summons in one turn. When you already have 3 drones on the battlefield and attack with show, any damaged drone will be removed first. If they are all at full health, then the oldest summoned drone will die first. Next, let's talk about summon turn order. I went over this recently in my Dirty Dozen video, but summons act in the order in which they are created. This is useful to know for characters like Gulgorts who create orc boys. These guys are really good at killing the boss adds and let you keep your Skitarii focused on the boss itself in order to trigger Exeter Row. Okay, so with some preliminary stuff out of the way, let's look at the current bosses in the game. The mech team is currently best in slot against these bosses. Snowprint recognize how good this team is, and I think this is factoring into their design of more recent bosses, where the mech team isn't really viable. The Tyranid bosses are the first raid bosses in the game. The fight and design reflects that simplicity, and these fights are tailored for newer players. There are two flavors of this original Tyranid boss, and I'll talk you through the nuances of both. Broadly, for this fight, you want to use your core 3 admechs and lure the boss into the low ground. There is no guaranteed way of doing that, but at least you stand a chance if you position your units within attack range on turn 1. Once the boss is in low ground, you want to surround and pin it in place. Since here there is no room for the boss to move, it stays in place and Exeter Row gets tons of extra out of turn attacks every round. Both the Tervigon and Hive Tyrant fights are fairly similar in some respects. Pin it to the low ground and hit it with a lot of summons. The difference for the teams comes in with the characters that you would bring along for optimum play. Helbrecht joins both teams because he is so good against Psyker bosses. When you put him in next to Exeter Row, he gives a huge bonus to those out-of-turn attacks. For Tervigon, I like filling that last slot with Aleph Null, whose scarabs can help block the boss off nicely. For the Hive Tyrant, it summons these Ripper Swarms, and I like Rayvas or Gulgorts here. If you don't have a clever way of dealing with the swarms, they'll distract your Skitarii summons for several turns. After the Rippers are dead, Rayvas and her 2 drones are mechs, so you get more out-of-turn hits for a row. For both teams, the Dreadnought is the machine of war of choice. The Szarekh fight is won and lost based on how well you understand the strategy in terms of getting him off his throne. The best way of doing this is by offering him a tempting target to attack, usually a spore mine. Put this mine within range of him running down and attacking, and you've at least given yourself a chance of success. Note that if the spores are too weak, he might prefer to shoot them instead of attacking them in melee. After that, it's quite similar to the Tyranid fight. Surround him and keep attacking with the Skitarii. If Szarekh comes down on turn 1, then he is guaranteed to summon his death marks on turn 2, so you can plan accordingly. This boss summons his death marks every 3 turns, so if he summons on turn 2, you can expect him to summon again on turn 5. It's harder to pin this boss in place compared to the original Tyranid bosses, and given the behaviour of the Skitarii to prefer to attack at range. Therefore, for this boss you want to bring the Biovore and use his active ability, which surrounds the boss with 3 spore mines to help keep him locked in place. What about if the boss summons on turn 1 instead of taking the bait? Just kill at least 2 Deathmark summons and remember to leave the boss a path to run off his throne on turn 2 to attack your mines. For this fight I like using the core 3 admechs, Vitruvius, and you can choose to either have Sho or Gulgorts in that 5th slot. The latter is probably better at dealing with the summoned Skitarii, but requires a bit more positional skill. Obviously, the Biovore is the machine of war of choice. Mortarion has been buffed several times and still the admech are the best team against him. The fight always starts with Mortarion laying down his area of effect lantern against your units, and you're punished for remaining within that area of effect. Essentially, you want to use the fact that he always starts with this ability to bait him down into a favourable position on the low ground. The best way to do this is to offer him an attractive clump of units, knowing that he preferentially lays down the lantern on the largest group that he can impact. On the following turn, he will try and do a scythe attack or Plague Wind. Plague Wind is used against clumps of units, and you can get him to preferentially use this if it fits your strategy and keeps him locked in position. Mortarion alternates between the lantern and then either Plague Wind or Scythe, so you just dance around him, creating different pockets of summons to distract his attentions while Exeter Row builds up damage and you get to a critical mass of units. Helbrecht is pretty vital to this boss because he gives Row the extra damage through his passive ability. Mortarion also does damage every turn to units in melee, so Aleph Null acts like a personal healer for Exeter Row after she has summoned some scarabs to populate the battlefield and distract the boss. These scarabs do introduce some RNG into the fight because you never know when they're going to multiply. Generally speaking, the more they multiply, the better your run goes. In terms of machine of war, Galatian is a solid pick if you can understand and master the boss positioning, but requires heavy investment. The Biovore is another option if you're not quite there and just want a bit of help to get the lantern to land exactly where you want, or for some specific maps where you need the spores to block some hexes or redirect the lantern where you want it. For this fight, your team really has to be high level for the strategy to work. Melee units are not supposed to survive against Mortarion for very long, so you need to have pretty close to maxed out characters to survive here. The Screamer Killer is stronger than the other Tyranid bosses, but in a lot of ways a dumber boss who you can lock in position and ensure he doesn't move around. I've done a whole deep dive showcase on this boss that I'll link in the video description to save me a bit of time here. All you have to do is get the boss onto low ground, summon a lot of Skitarii, and then go to town. It's honestly one of the easiest boss fights for the mech team and a really easy tank and spank fight where you can throw up high numbers. Just remember that you need to cross a certain threshold for armor, both for your characters and summons, in order for the Screamer to deal minimal damage with its melee physical damage attack. I like Galatian as the Machine of War here for its obvious synergy as a mechanical summon. The Rogal Dorn boss fight is tricky but rewarding for the mech team. The key thing here is understanding how the tank moves so that you can take advantage of its vulnerable rear armor for multiple turns. The battle tank moves forward on turn 1 and then turns to face the side with the most enemies and lays down this area of effect attack. This damages your units if they move while under this area of effect gaze. Dealing critical hits to Rogal Dorn's rear armor turns the effect off, and the key thing for the mechanical team is anticipating where the battle tank will move on its next turn. Ideally, you want Exeter Row to move into position where the battle tank will end its next turn, so that Row can immediately start to get out of turn damage from the summons. There is some cool stuff you can do with Sho, where you can use the Biovore to cause Sho's drones to spawn away from him, like seen here. Then Tangida's attacks trigger 4 extra attacks at once. As you can see here, the key thing, and this comes with experience and learning boss movements, is that you always want to end your turn with Row moving to the correct position to anticipate where the tank moves next. My preference for team of choice here is the core 3 AdMechs plus Vitruvius and Sho. I've seen some people recommend Aethana. That's an okay choice and way less technically challenging, but you don't get to do the cool 4-unit Tangida triggers like seen here. For Machine of War, it's a bit map dependent, but both Galatian and the Biovore are good choices to complete the team. Finally, the Avatar of Khaine. Galgorts is a great character to bring along to this fight when we remember our lessons from earlier. Summons act in the order they were created, so when you wag on turn 1, those boys will go hunting the extra guardians that spawn over the course of the fight. The additional range from wag also helps get your AdMech characters into the right position. Like the other bosses, you need to understand how the Avatar uses his abilities to make the most of the fight. The Avatar of Khaine always opens with either his sweep or strike attack. The mode he chooses is the mode that will catch the most of your units. For maps like this, you can see how positioning your units properly will let you set up for a high ground position with Exeter Row on turn 2. After that, you want to try and trap the Avatar of Khaine in position. To do that, having immovable units is crucial. Galgorts has big target, so he helps, and deploying the Dreadnought is another option. The Avatar fight also reinforces the principles from earlier, about the positive and negative hex effects where our Skitarii summons will spawn and where they will preferentially move. You can keep this in mind when thinking about unit positioning as the fight wears on. There you go. I hope you enjoyed the video. Here is a small thank you code, and if you're interested in pushing your gameplay to the next level, drop by the Eye of Terror Discord where we are currently recruiting strong players. Thanks as always to my Patreons, and bye for now.